folks, in my 20s, obviously, I thought I was bulletproof. I was one of the first paramedics to hit the street, so I was working 96-hour shifts because I wanted that money. And then I joined, a couple of years later, I joined, they asked me to be on the SWAT team, and I went through the police academy. Doing all this, I didn't understand what it was doing to my physiology. A few years after that, I got promoted to lieutenant. At the fire department, I was in charge of a shift. Well, while I'm in charge of a shift and I'm dealing with PTSD, I'm responding to emergency calls. I was still lieutenant paramedic then, and I'm giving people medication. And now the people that are screaming and yelling, I'm starting to hear it, and I'm starting to tear up on the scene. So now I'm getting emotional on the scene. I'm supposed to be in charge of 15 people, millions of dollars of equipment, and I'm starting to lose it, right? So where do I go? I go to the local bar the next shift and try to deal with this in my head. But I did go to counseling, and this is where I knew that we needed to do it better, especially today in 2017. Back then, I would go to a counselor, and the counselor really couldn't relate with what I was going through. So with the suicides of my two friends, they started a critical incident stress debriefing team. They had more people that understood our jobs and what we did. So I'm going through the counselor, I'm looking at this guy going, this is worthless. And at that time, I needed other parts of my body to be taken care of. So here's what saved my life, believe it or not. I moved away from my emergency service community, and I started hanging out with a bunch of triathletes. Now think about physiologically what happened. By me wanting to do triathlons, and I started running, I elevated my endorphins, I was out in the sun, elevating my melatonin levels. I wanted to train with these guys in the morning, so I had to get to bed. I had to limit the sugar, I changed my diet. So physiologically, by me moving away from that emergency service community and doing all the drinking, I moved out to the triathlon community, which was really, that's lonely. Anytime you make a change away from your peer group, it's lonely, let me tell you. So I moved and I started hanging out with the triathletes, thank God, because it was my saving grace. And I'm not telling people you need to do triathlons, but you always need to consider the community that you surround yourself with. Because I always tell people, Bruce, show me your 3 friends, I'll show you your health, right?
Yeah.
You also did a 5K in like a fasting state, right?
Yeah, I did. I had done previous 5Ks, and that's my preferred race of, choice of race, but I don't do them as often as I used to. But after being on a ketogenic diet, if you remember one morning I sent you a text and I said, hey Russ, when's the best time to exercise during this intermittent fasting? Do I do it during the intermittent fasting, after my first meal, at night before I go to bed? What do you think is best? And you said during the state of fasting. So I hadn't run a 5K in probably 6 or 8 months, and I hadn't really trained that hard for it either. And for the month prior to starting the ketogenic diet, I had absolutely no training whatsoever. I was so busy and wrapped up in other things I didn't train. But for my daughter, I went out and I ran a 5K one morning, and I decided to do it during the intermittent fasting portion of my diet, which was an early morning. It was cold, it was about 40 degrees that morning, but I went out and I was interested in seeing if I had the energy to actually, 1, finish, and 2, how it compared to my previous times in 5Ks. And one of the things that surprised me was there was very little drop-off, if any at all.
Wow.
My time was almost identical to what a normal 5K would be for me. I did have to change my intervals a little bit. I just don't go and I run steady and I maintain a single pace. I would go and I'd keep a high pace. It was more of an interval run for me. But my time was identical, and there seemed to be absolutely no fall off. I got home, I was fine. I waited another hour. I had my first meal of the day, which was on schedule, and there were no ill effects from it whatsoever.
That's amazing, because I've got triathlete coaches in town here that are still preaching the high carbohydrate diet. I used to train with these guys, and they will not listen. But it's really interesting, folks. On a cellular level, this is really cool. You got mitochondria in every cell of your body, and your mitochondria creates energy, your ATP. So when Bruce was running in a fasted state on the ketogenic diet, his mitochondria on a cellular level, instead of burning carbohydrates, switched over and started burning fat. Well, now all the new research from all the Dalai Lamas in the endurance community is more and more endurance athletes are switching to the high-fat diet. Even the guy that won the Western States 100-mile run did it on a high-fat diet. So hearing you say that, and not wanting you to put to sleep with all the science, but no, it's good feedback for me, because when I get somebody on this, and now that you ran that race in a fasted state, I remember slamming down the gels and eating power bars and trying to to get through a 10-mile run, and we don't need that.
Yeah.
Isn't that odd? That's
Yeah.
amazing.
There's examples of people that get involved in some sort of high intensity activity, and they load up on carbs. But the one things they don't take into consideration is the amount of adrenaline they're building up and they're dumping after they start these activities.
Right.
And next thing you know, you haven't completed the activity and you're toast. You're done. You've got nothing left in the tank. But the thing I noticed with being on a ketogenic diet is that state of energy, the amount of energy I need to complete the task is there consistently. At least during the 5K, it never dropped off. So.
Yeah, and if you go back to history in the beginning of time, Tret and I did some research on this. Like Hannibal, when he was crossing the Alps, what Hannibal did was took animal fat and he shoved coffee beans in it and made them about the size of a golf ball. And this is what they ate when they would go to battle, and it said it would sustain them for 2 days. So you know what I mean? It's like when you study the history of performance, you see that they kind of knew back in the day that that fat was a great fuel, and we didn't need 3 meals a day. We didn't need all this grain. So anyway.
And I think one of the things that helps sustain me throughout the day is my higher intake of fat now than before,
Right.
even when compared versus the high protein that I did before. The higher fat intake is sustaining me longer. I don't feel hungry, and at some point in time, if it gets to be 5 or 6 or 6:30 at night, I have to force myself to eat because I know eventually I'll need those nutrients. But I'm able to do that and sustain that long period of time because of the higher fat intake.
The fat secretes something called CCK, cholecystokinin, which shuts off a satisfaction signal. Back when you were eating 6 meals a day, you were fluctuating insulin levels and you were constantly hungry.